All right. Good morning. Friends, if you heard that recording in progress, it means we have officially begun. Thank you. It's great to have you in this space today. My name is Kenny Hubbell. I'm primarily up in our connection service. I'm coming up just from that service, and as I try to settle down from a sermon preached on money and politics, we have come to this place to talk about a much safer topic, teenagers and technology. I hope you have the class notes in front of you. Let me just point to the last week's recap. You'll see I just wrote, because it kind of felt like that last week. We were really looking at the data of a lot of the challenges that our young people are facing, and at times it can feel very discouraging because we know that they're contending with a great battle of mental health. It's largely stemming from their use of technology in their phones. There's a direct correlation between how much time they're spending on their phones, tablets, screens, and they're feeling purposeless or unhappy or even despairing. And so we pointed towards really many data points. If you weren't here last week, just trust that the picture is a little grim, that it's worth contending with the very real issue in front of us. And as you have gathered in your various capacities and contexts, I hope you're here because you love and want to support teenagers, even if you don't have a teenager. Maybe it's a grandchild, maybe it's a neighbor down the road, maybe you have young children and you foresee this to be an issue down the road. It will be. We talked about Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the trends that continue with both of them because of their universal access to technology as a whole. We mentioned how girls in particular are often, though there are certainly exceptions, are often the ones most contending with self-image and the comparison realities of that. And we talked about some studies that put this on a more neurological level, meaning it wasn't so much about having a mature child in your midst, but that our brains are being rewired by our technology. And through puberty, when your brain has the most plasticity, that's when you're particularly vulnerable to things that you are experiencing, the time that you're spending doing any sort of activity. We have lifted up this resource by Jonathan Haidt. It's called The Anxious Generation. This is a big-time resource. This is sort of moving through the nation like wildfire. I'm seeing schools and churches lift this up as a book study. I'm seeing this in a lot of homes of my peers who have young children, and certainly my peers who have older children, especially those on the cusp of their teenage years. Some of the tension we're going to be sitting into this morning is how do we kind of pull back if we've already gotten to some muddy waters? Meaning if we have some teenagers who are already about a lot of fixation to their phones, how do we walk that back? Can we walk that back? Is it feasible? How do we tell our 10, 11, and 12-year-olds that, no, they're not going to get a smartphone for Christmas? You might not get a smartphone until you're 16. That's scandalous. That idea that your child will not get a smartphone until they are 16 is a scandalous idea. Hi, Bill. Good morning. That gives me time to step aside and clear my pockets. Here's where we are headed, making headway with our young people as it relates to their devices through authentic relationships. We are all equipped for that. We can all meet young people in a conversation in an authentic relationship. In fact, if we do not have the fertile ground of an authentic relationship, we probably are going to be ineffective in trying to reach our young people, especially as it relates to their very protective nature over their devices and their use of technology. Proverbs 22:6, train children in the right way, and when old, they will not stray. It's a well-known proverb. We often use that as sort of an ethos of parenting. We are trying to train up our young people. I know out of my conversations within the community, there are many grandparents who have maybe the stronger conviction that there should be boundaries along the phones of their grandchildren. And you have the unique hurdle of then interacting with your child or your son or daughter-in-law and trying to engage in this conversation. We're going to try to hit those markers today, to try to maybe empower you to have these difficult but needed conversations. To model maybe our entry point, think about how you might teach God's law, the 10 Commandments. How would you teach that to a young person? I know for a fact if that we taught more so from the consequential, punitive side, they would see God as a wrathful figure, one who is out to get them, to be punitive. This is actually why there are many Christian traditions in their teaching that bring up congregations who are very fearful, because God is almost always seen in this punitive, strict, wrathful way. Versus if you might teach the boundaries of God's love as a means of protection and safety and love, and the tone is different, well, you might not have that same image of God. This is how I often teach our youth, particularly our middle school students, about things like the 10 Commandments, or even any sort of rules and parameters. I tell them, God doesn't want to get in the way of your fun. It's not about restricting what you can do. It's that God, in God's infinite wisdom, knows our potential to hurt ourselves and others. And God, like any loving parent, wants to make sure that we are kept safe, that we don't look back with regret, that we aren't hurt in our person or in our relationships. And so as we understand God's law, it's a matter of protecting us out of care. And if that's the tone we achieve, well, then our middle schoolers are much more receptive to the teaching because they're seeing it as a means of care. Our young people are exceedingly intuitive. They know what's behind the thing that we're moving towards them with. And so for us, where maybe there's authentic worry and concern, maybe anger, we need to temper that down so that we become an approachable force in our conversations with them. This will be the tone that we bring into the class today. Here's our icebreaker. I'd like you to just turn and talk for just about 90 seconds. This is your prompt. Which biblical father would you choose for yourself? And no, you cannot choose your heavenly Father. So outside of God, who in the Bible, and any of the stories we say, well, that's what the dad I would want. Go ahead, talk amongst yourselves.
Because he listened to God, like even when it made no sense, and he was like, okay, I'm going to preserve this, you know, and he had a lot of fortitude, so maybe that's who I would.
I think it's just sort of considering a lot of kids learn from their mistakes, see a little bit of.
Yeah, that's right. It's true. We should have that mercy. Right. And Cindy, it's nice to meet you. Yeah. And my team is information. He's 18. Yeah, he's a senior. Basketball, which is my practice the second thing on Monday night. So he can't. It's we have almost every single day. Mondays and Wednesdays for sure. So, but what is it? Is that a love show?
I didn't know if you were he is very we were able to company to bank.
Okay, friends, I'm going to bring you back. Though it is an interesting question. I have some advantages here. So I did my doctoral work in fatherhood, biblical fatherhood, masculinity, vulnerability. That was my cornerstone project at Union. And so I've given this a lot of thought, and that was one of the questions I posed to the group during my final presentation. And it kind of caught a lot of people off guard because you look at the biblical fathers being represented, and there seems to be a shortage of good ones. It's actually really kind of hard to access that, or at least we can see only small segments of where there might be a good trait being modeled in Scripture. And what I actually came up with my answer is those unnamed fathers that we see in the Gospels advocating for their sick children. On multiple occasions, you see people, fathers, approaching Jesus. They're falling at Jesus' feet, and they're saying, please help me, Lord, heal my child. This is an example of breaking social protocol for men in that society at that time. To have that sort of posture and that sort of outcry would be almost disrespectful, a little unfathomable. But it's those dads who are operating on a deep care out of their kid that represent something very true and loving of fatherhood. And that certainly applies to all parenthood and all grandparenthood. That's the example I bring forth. It's that willingness to not do what everyone else is doing, but to break social protocol and to move towards what is authentic care for our children. We have the data. Our young boys, our young girls are growing up sicker, and that includes their physical, mental, and emotional health, their spiritual health. We want to intervene, and to do so, we need to break some social protocols. I had a student in my youth program. This is a female student. She was about 14, maybe 15 at the time. This is about nearly 10 years ago. I got coffee with her often, and she had a lot of struggles, a lot of pitfalls in her life. And at some point, after maybe 2 years of close relationship with her, she shared with me some of the reason why I do these bad things is because I just want my parents to see me. And so she was equating a lack of consequence with a lack of care. She saw that every time she got away with more and more, her parents didn't intervene. She saw that as they're not caring for her. That's a cry for help. Most of what happens in the seedy underbelly of technology and phones and the internet, young people aren't aware of the dangers. And so it's our job to kind of step in and show our care by letting them understand the consequences that correlate with their behaviors and their phones. Brene Brown is another author that I lifted up on our week one as a good resource for us. She has a book called Daring Greatly. This is on your class notes. I would like to read this. It's just about parenting. It certainly extends to grandparenting, and it extends really to all relationships. The fundamental elements being authenticity and vulnerability. She writes, when it comes to parenting, the practice of framing mothers and fathers as good or bad is both rampant and corrosive. It turns parenting into a shame minefield. The real questions for parents should be, are you engaged? Are you paying attention? If so, plan to make lots of mistakes and bad decisions. Imperfect parenting moments turn into gifts as our children watch us try to figure out what went wrong and how we can do better next time. The mandate is not to be perfect and to raise happy children. Perfection doesn't exist. And I've found what makes children happy doesn't always prepare them to be courageous, engaged adults. I had read this study, I think it was out of Oregon or Oregon State University, and it was about how we understand parenting, and it was these very few fields. It was like parenting with hostility or kindness, permissiveness and strictness, and they kind of made a quad box of the types of parenting that students were reporting. And by far and away, the most effective style of parenting was to be strict and loving. That was the combination. You probably would guess at that. The second was hostile and strict, not loving and permissive. The second most effective in terms of the metric being like achievement and general feeling of integrating well into society from the college perspective was those parents who were identified as hostile and strict, not permissive and loving. And so the whole point is the permissiveness is an indicator of weaker outcomes, with young people who are growing up feeling less confident, less able to integrate into society around them. I'm not coaching you to be hostile. I don't want that. I hope we can be loving, but also less permissive, because in what Brene Brown's pointing to is there's a great temptation to just have our young people be happy. And we lift up happiness as the main value. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I come from a home where I'm sensitive to not bringing up spoiled children. And that's so hard, because I want to spoil my children. It's as an example, I'm a bad negotiator with my son Bennett. He's 4. We went out and we picked acorns off the sidewalk yesterday. We filled up a jar of acorns, and he said, "Well, I want to bring this inside." And I said, "No, the acorns stay outside for the squirrel." And he was like, "Okay, well, how about just one acorn?" So okay, you can bring in one acorn. We can put it on your desk. And then he said. And I said, that's it, you're going to bring one acorn. And he said, how about 2 acorns? One for each hand, because we have 2 hands. I said, okay, you can bring 2 acorns in the house, whatever, but no more. I said, not 3. He said, no, we don't have 3 hands. And so in his logic, that's just an illustration of course, as parents, we want to provide what we can provide, especially when we can easily provide things. It is difficult to take on confrontation willingly. We're all in our families trying to reduce that. We want it to be a seamless, happy, loving place. And the sad truth of families is that it doesn't always get to be that way. And so we have to sometimes take a step towards confronting an issue and contending with authentic tensions. That's true in this larger conversation. We're going to make young people unhappy. But we've already established that young people are intuitive. They know that even when there is consequence, that is an act of care. They can perceive where we're coming from, especially if we hit the tone right with our genuine love for them. That's the goal. That's what we're moving towards. But we're only going to do that if we actually establish good empathy and vulnerability. Empathy stems from our authentic understanding of each other. That's how we gain empathy. If we've ever experienced a disconnect, it's probably to someone that you feel not very empathetic to, because it's that disconnect that gets in the way for us to understand what it's like to walk in their shoes. And if you are not a Gen Zer or a Gen Alpha, then we are somewhat experiencing a disconnect with their world and our world, regardless of what generation we might be belonging to. And so you may have heard this from your child, or actually, I think this is a universal. If you have children, you've heard this. You don't get it, right? You don't get it. You don't get it, because what we're trying to, in our coaching and our moving towards them with the wisdom that we authentically have, they say, well, you don't get it. The world's different. High school isn't like that anymore. Friendships aren't like that for you. Social media is this thing that we actually don't know what that's like. I'm not very old, but I am older than the onset of social media throughout our most formative years. Thankfully, I look back, I talk to friends often about how glad we are that we did not have to contend with social media throughout our high school years. Now our young people are contending with this and to a great degree. And so how we contend with empathy is that we bring in vulnerability. And Brene Brown has more to say about that. These quotes are located in your class notes. I'm only going to read this first one. Vulnerability isn't good or bad. It's not what we call a dark emotion, nor is it always a light, positive experience. Vulnerability is the core of all emotions and feelings. To feel is to be vulnerable. To believe that vulnerability is weakness is to believe that feeling is weakness. Pause. In my doctoral studies, this is what catches a lot of men of a certain generation. This idea that stoicism is the ideal, that in our unfeeling we are more logical. It's a myth. We are created as feeling beings. We have systemic challenges that sometimes promote a view of masculinity, like stoicism, that actually gets us out of touch with our very authentic feelings. I used to think my dad was a very stoic man, was an unfeeling sort of person, unless I experienced his temper. And that's where I saw his feelings. And I realized in my older age, I thought, oh, my dad is a very feeling person. He just has a hard time articulating how he's feeling. To foreclose on our emotional life out of a fear that the cost will be too high is to walk away from the very thing that gives purpose and meaning to life. Hear that as an encouragement. It is hard work, but it is worthwhile work to meet anyone in authentic empathy and vulnerability. It's the most human part of us. I'm not talking about children, I'm not talking about youth or teenagers. When you can sit across from any person, whether it's the dinner table or a coffee or a boardroom, and you can truly just engage with that person, there's something holy and beautiful happening in them. We are operating on our most human levels, especially if we can get rid of our defensiveness, our predisposition to judge. When we can kind of get on a level playing field with each other, really good things happen in relationship. That is certainly true as we approach our young people. On your class notes, you'll see finding common ground. Here's now the bulk of this morning. First, let me give you sort of a social media overview. That was a question that was raised up last week. Can you give us a little snapshot of the social media landscape that our young people are contending with? You all have heard of Facebook. Who has a Facebook? Now, that's true for many of you. Many teenagers don't have a Facebook anymore, because you raised your hand and you have a Facebook. That's no longer a safe place for them. And if we all migrated to Instagram, they would be off Instagram. They would move on to the next thing, because that's the nature of young people seeking their own paths in the world. They're trying to find circles and tribes away from the family system where they can kind of explore themselves publicly. And so Facebook is sort of the irrelevant one. I'm not going to talk about Facebook because it's for folks like us. I have a Facebook. Y'all have a Facebook. Great, we can all hang out there. That's not where the kids are. So there are three primary places where our young people are spending the majority of their social media time. Instagram is a simple video and picture sharing social media, meaning you have a profile and you post a picture or a video of something that's happening in your world and your life. You can also share other people's content or story or life. And so if I had an actor that I really like, I might share news of that actor on my personal page. I only share my children. It's just Bennett and Bailey. Every time I'm posting on Instagram, that's all I'm doing. But I'm considered rather old on Instagram. Most of our young people on Instagram, yeah, go ahead.
The Instagram pictures and that sort of thing, does that last forever? Like Facebook, you can go back 10 years.
Yeah.
Can you go back?
Yeah, it's archived. It's on your profile. I posted, if you looked at mine, it's probably in 2015, and it's a picture. I look like a baby, and I'm like engaged to McKay. That would have been 10 years ago, and that's probably one of my first Instagram posts, and that will stay there. There's a feature on Instagram called a story, and a story is temporary. Though you can choose to put it as a part of your larger profile, but most people use that for like, here's a blip. It's going to last for 24 hours and then go away. But there is a permanence like Facebook that is true of Instagram. Instagram has the feature to direct message, meaning we can contact like a text in the app itself. It's what makes it a fundamental social media app. A social media app has to have these 4 things: a username, some sort of notification system, which Instagram does. You'll know if someone likes your picture. A means of posting personal information, and well, we were just talking about this. The messaging, the ability to communicate directly. That's what kind of constitutes a social media app. And so Instagram's a popular one. More popular than Instagram, I'm seeing with our young folks, is something called Snapchat. I do not like this app. I do not like it because of what it sort of implies as an app. It is non-permanent, meaning you don't have a post that sits on your profile. You can make a story like Instagram, and so you can share what you're doing, and that's public view of all your followers, or if your profile is public to anyone who just stumbles across your profile. But the thing of Snapchat, the feature that is liked by our young people, is that you send a snap and then it's 10 seconds and it's gone. Or you can actually dictate the time that the person can see it. And this has sort of the allure of anonymity, or like, not anonymity, non-permanence. It's just temporary. I can throw this picture, this saying out, and then it will be gone forever. It's not true. It's archived. It's in your terms of acceptance, and when you agree to the terms, it's archived. Snapchat holds all of your content, but there's this illusion that it's private and that it goes away quickly. And so you can imagine how that leads to some bad choices. You also can like text on that too. There's a direct messaging feature, and so it's not just a picture or a video that you send back and forth, but you can just type in that. Maybe the most popular right now, I'm sure you have some awareness of, is TikTok. TikTok has maybe the most complicated algorithm. We talked about algorithms last week and how you get featured content that moves towards you. The example I might use is if I click on a video of a chef cooking, and I'm like, he's cooking this great meal. And then I click on that and I like that post. The algorithm says, oh, this person likes cooking. And then I go back on the app, and now there's 3 videos of people cooking. And it's like, oh, good chefs making good food, and I just keep liking them. Soon, all of my TikTok is just chef content. That's fine. That's a trivial thing. But imagine if all your content, the things that you're clicking on, are about nutrition advice from very unhealthy people who are exceedingly thin, or who are using filters to make you look a certain way. And all of a sudden you keep clicking on this content, and if I'm a 13-year-old girl and all of what I'm seeing are these models looking a certain way, living this certain way, and I have the perception of, see, everyone looks like this. Not accurate. Very few people look like this. But because it's the only thing that you are perceiving, it's this false sense of, well, I'm so different. And this becomes obviously problematic. So that's TikTok. And then Twitter. Twitter, you have the direct messaging back and forth. You can post, but it's like just a text. I don't see our young people utilizing Twitter at all. That is something that I think of millennials and older, but primarily it's Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. Any questions about social media before we move on?
The question about TikTok is being a Chinese company, and periodically our politicians try to shut it down. Are the young people not aware that their data is being used by it?
Apathetic to it.
They don't care.
They hear it, they know it, they've been told that. That is not the place of concern. That's the choice. And in fact, if we shut it down, there will probably be workarounds. And our young people will figure out those workarounds and utilize it.
I would think an American company would have stepped to the plate by now, but I don't see it happening.
I think TikTok's here to stay, in that it is the most popular social media app right now.
It's pretty addictive. I dance around it myself. But what about the notion of influencers? So do you find the young people you're working with wanting to be one of them? Right?
Yeah, I've heard, vocationally speaking, what do you want to be when you grow up? Influencer is a thing that I hear, which is sad because it's just as competitive as being like a pro athlete in terms of statistics, those who are participating in the kind of influential space. I think I mentioned last week, our young people's worldview are most primarily being built up on these influencers. They have a supreme amount of authority in the lives of our young people, and the algorithm is supportive of that. So a common one I see is, I want to be an influencer, and if I say, okay, well, doing what? It's like travel. It's like travel and, like hotel critic. Well, yeah, okay, I want to do that too. To be paid to just go to exotic places, and so they see oh, this 25-year-old is off and they're in Tahiti and they're at this lovely resort and they're being paid to do this and they do that and they're like, oh, I can do that because it's maybe not that hard, but that person looks a certain way and has been doing it a certain way for a long time, and it's not usually a very achievable thing to mirror. But again, if you click on this and that you get that engagement, the algorithm gives you all of that content. And so now you're scrolling through dozens of different people doing that. And so you have the illusion that, oh, anyone can do this. Sets us up for a false reality. And so that absolutely is an element of our young people, continuing with the influencer space. Are we feeling good? Are we feeling optimistic about the landscape of our young people? No, and that's okay. We can. I don't want to just next week have to say our recap is again, as we move forward. So let's make this a little more practical. I think we're in agreement that there is a true problem here. There's an issue to be solved or at least addressed. Every family system is going to look a little different. Every young person's interaction with their phone and social media is going to be different. If I had a parent come to me and they say, my son's on playing video games for 6 hours a day, I'm going to respond to that very differently than my daughter is on Instagram 6 hours a day, or my grandchild is on their phone 1 hour a day. All of those require very different response in how we go about solving those challenges. You know your family. You know the young people that you would try to impress upon and try to maybe change their mind a little bit as it relates to this topic. You have to intuit what might actually work and be successful. The big thing that we can all certainly participate in is striking the right sort of tone and empathy. If we are angry or come off a little too direct and feisty about this, you need to get off your phone. How come every time I'm over here at the dinner table, you're on your phone? Of course they're going to be defensive to that. Our tone is aggressive. We are bringing hostility in their lap. We might feel that way. We might have that earnest frustration, but that's just not going to be the way forward with our young people. We don't want defenses up, we want defenses down. To establish that, we need to develop this sort of vulnerable, empathetic tone. We need to know what they're dealing with. So here's a scenario. I was going to role play this, like actually have us do this, but I don't think we have time for that, and so I'm not going to try to get to the logistics of that. But here's just envision this scene. You are sitting down with your granddaughter or daughter, and you have the concern that they are on their device too much. You know that they spend maybe 3 hours on their phones, on social media apps each day, which is probably like kind of a middle average. In terms of there's a lot of young people on their phone for more than 3 hours a day, and there's certainly young people who are off their phone, only on their phone for an hour or so. It's rare to find a young person who just isn't interested in their phone or some other technological device. So you have your daughter or granddaughter sitting on the couch, and you are moving towards them with concern that they have just been too much on their phone. That's the scene. That's a very relatable scene. And for us to even approach them, we have to have a sense of, well, what are they experiencing? Why is it that they're so glued to their phone? What's the fear about getting a healthier detachment from their phone? That's a really good empathetic place to start. Do you suspect a reason? Or have you heard a reason? Why are young people...
They feel connection. They feel connection.
They feel connection, and they fear the loss of connection,
yes.
Of missing out.
Yeah.
If I'm not on this, I'll miss something. Y'all recall when you were a teenager, that's a devastating reality, to feel like you're on the outside, to feel like you don't have a clue what's going on. You don't want to be at the lunch table at school the next day and have no idea what everyone else knows. You feel like a loser. You feel like you're on the outside. That's the big fear. If the fear is well placed or not, probably depends on the situation. But for our young people, the disconnect from their phone means a disconnect in general from their whole community. I would say we want to supplant the virtual community with authentic in-person community. If you're going to take a stance with a child or grandchild about kind of reducing their phone time, I hope you will substitute it with in-person relationships. That would be a good, hey, instead of doing this today, how about you have a friend come over and we'll do something, try at least as a transition time to get them out of the habit and maybe the addiction. Yeah, we're not out of the woods here. We're going to look at addiction here in a moment. But in terms of maybe substituting what we have to offer them if we're wanting them to move away from their phones. But if we can access the vulnerable part in us and remembering when we were young and say, oh, it doesn't feel good to be left out, we can sort of lead with that tone. We know that we have to be gentle about this because there's a real loss in that. That's genuine. Well, to feel left out is something that, oh, I understand why you'd be worried about that. And so we sit down with our daughter or granddaughter, and we're ready to kind of engage in this conversation. I love this phrase. I don't know who I might have coined this phrase, truly. Don't answer a question that someone hasn't asked. And I see this often in youth ministry. It's like, I can't just because I care about it doesn't matter. They have to care about it. And so if they're not asked, that just becomes a lecture. The reason I'm not giving this downstairs at 9 o'clock worship is because people didn't sign up for it. You all did. I'll bring this content to you really directly and explicitly because you signed up for it. You've asked this question, what's going on with our teenagers? And so similarly, as we move towards the couch with our daughter or granddaughter, we don't want to just start answering questions that they don't have. A good way to diffuse that temptation is to start with questions. Easy questions. How are you doing? What's going on? Have them put their phone down in that moment. Hey, if they're up, hey, can you put your phone down just so we can have a conversation? And then that's fine. Remember, they're intuitive. They'll get a sense of how we're moving towards them out of care. And you can ask the question, how much time do you spend on your phone? Like on a normal day, do you think? Every phone has your usage. And you can even ask them, have you checked your usage? I'm just curious. What do you spend? If they scrolled over to their front page, they'll see, oh, I spent 4.5 hours on social media. And you're, oh, is that a big day? That seems like a lot of time. Oh, that's pretty average. Really? What are you doing for 4.5 hours? It can't be accusatory. Hear my tone. What are you doing for 4.5 hours? That's a considerable amount of time. Is that like you're like talking with friends? What are you doing for 4.5 hours or 3 hours, whatever it is? Oh, it's usually I'm just scrolling Instagram. Oh, really? What do you see? What's on your Instagram? I know I heard this thing called an algorithm. What is that? What are you seeing in your page? And they're, oh, well, I see a lot of horseback riding or whatever. Oh, that's fine. I know you love that. You're engaging with them authentically. Pivoting then, do you ever feel like being on your phone is like kind of taking you out of the real world around you? Yes, maybe no. You're just authentically engaging with them. Have you ever felt? I've been reading through this book that I learned about in church. I've been reading through this book that a lot of young people are reporting that they don't necessarily feel great in their mental health. They don't necessarily feel like they have a lot of meaning right now. Is that true for you? It kind of worried me to read that, to hear about that. Oh, yeah, sometimes. Has there been a moment where you caught yourself comparing yourself to other people? Yeah, homecoming pictures just came out, and I didn't go, and that did feel bad. That's tough. I'm sorry. None of that is magic. That's authentic care. You are all very capable of engaging the young people that you love with that sort of authenticity, especially if you can manage that tone. When it touches upon something that truly breaks your heart, because it will, let them know. Oh, that hurts me to hear that. I'm so sorry that you felt so left out. Is that why you're on your phone? You don't want to be left out. Thank you. You get it. That's what we're trying to move from. Not getting it and to be assumed that we don't get it to, oh, we're getting it a little bit. This might have some clunkiness. This might take 10 attempts. But keep at it, because the more you're engaging your young people with this topic, you're just showing very clear care. This is going to be something grandma, grandpa, mom, or dad, or friend, or neighbor is going to come back to with you. It's going to be an element of our relationship. Moving away from their phones, we have to consider addiction. I'm going to read a page out of this resource here. This is Jonathan Haidt writing about, there was this thing called the Facebook files. You might have heard of them. It was a whistleblower brought forth internal documentation from the Facebook company that was very condemning of some of their behaviors. And so he writes, we know that Facebook intentionally hooked teens using behaviorist techniques thanks to the Facebook files, the trove of internal documents and screenshots of presentations brought out by the whistleblower Francis Hagen in 2021. A section titled Teen Fundamentals delves into neuroscience, showing the gradual maturation of the brain during puberty, with the frontal cortex not mature until after age 20. A subsequent slide shows the loop that Facebook designers strive to create in users and notes the points of vulnerability. Their goal was to advise other Facebook employees on how to keep her engaged, the test subject, engaged for longer with rewards, novelty, and emotions. And then we have this 4 foundational, the hooked model. These are the 4 things that happen in a loop on our social media. You have some sort of external trigger. This is a notification. Boop. Someone liked your picture. Then you have the action of going to click on that, engaging with the content. Then you have the variable reward. Dopamine release in the brain when you have this sort of engagement online. This is something that they're experiencing, the positive engagement. Oh, a friend has just reached out. I'm talking with a friend. That social element. We have a dopamine release when we sit down and have coffee with a friend. There's something very engaging and nurturing in that sort of connection. And then some degree of investment. I have my profile picture with my hobbies and likes. It's personalized to me, and I feel invested in this profile that I'm making. And then it just cycles over and over again. I won't read this study, I don't think. I have it in my notes. There was some study on some rats and about how to reward them through the maze. And they realized, the researchers, if they reward them every time, the rats will come through less. The reward being like a piece of food. But if it's an invariable reward system, they'll come constantly. And so if the rat didn't know if they were going to get the reward, they'll keep coming back. And if I asked this in a room full of teenagers, have you ever closed Instagram just to reopen it in 1 second? They'd all raise their hand. We might be guilty of that. Those triggers work for us too. But certainly for our young people, they have the universal experience, if they're on any social media, where they're sitting on the couch doing nothing, they're closing an app, meaning, oh, I'm done with this. And then not realizing that they're just opening it back up. They're actually testing that invariable reward system. And there's some psychological manipulation that's happening with the algorithm, with how social media's sites are putting up their content. I shared this last week with the Social Dilemma, that documentary on Netflix that interviews all of like the leading designers, engineers of all of these social media sites. They're asked by the interviewer, oh, do you let your children on the social media that you create? No. Hard no from all of them. Absolutely not. It's very telling, and they understand because they help create. There's some destructive tendencies that come with social media. So, our youth are very active on social media in a variety of apps and games, experiencing this dopamine release. But because they have this dopamine release, there's actually cause for concern as it relates to addiction. There's a Stanford University researcher, Ann Lemke, who's in this sort of field as it relates to youth and addiction, and she writes this about struggling youth who are addicted to technology. She says the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria, which is just a general state of unease. Now that just describes teenagers in general, regardless. Like that's just in general, you could say, it just seems like teenagers are acting on addiction withdrawal constantly because how often they are irritable, and that's partly because the hormones that are changing in their body, their brain chemistry is changing, but certainly it's heightened if they're experiencing withdrawal from their social media, from their technology. And I have many examples I could use anecdotally out of this community and out of families of this place and youth ministry families that I've been walking with for 13 years. This is a real thing. I'll protect their privacy, but this is very relatable in terms of what I'm hearing and experiencing even in this community. If you have a teenager or have a grandchild who is in the throes of a depressive episode or really heightened anxiety or a lot of irritability or a lot of insomnia or this general dysphoria, my guess is there's some element of misuse time as it relates to their phone or video games or some sort of technology. And likely, if you were to remove that impediment, if you were just to take away their phone for 2-3 week period, they would start to improve dramatically. Jonathan Haidt writes in this several anecdotal experiences of people who are writing to him saying, this was true of my daughter who went through rehab, and every time she was removed from her phone and social media, she got immediately better, and every time she came back into the regular routines of our household, with the inclusion of the returning to their phone, they got immediately worse. And so the correlation between how much time we're spending on social media, it's not always, this is not perfect data. There's too much space for anecdotal data here, but what's largely true is that social media and technology, especially if it's overused, becomes damaging to the psyche of our young people. So as we sit on that couch with our daughter or granddaughter, we might have to be sensitive to some degree of addiction. And some of the fighting towards it is maybe built out of their own not knowing, not being stubborn, but actually having sort of withdrawal from the app that they are authentically addicted to. Anything we spend 3 to 6 hours doing on any given day can become an addiction. We use the word workaholic. When you've devoted a big chunk of your time, when you are invested in any, whether it's a vocation or a hobby, we become somewhat addicted, even if that's just in the regimen of it, and just the routine of going about this thing over and over again. So we want to develop an empathetic road. That's the goal, and that's where we're going to spend the rest of this class. How do we engage in these conversations? Let me say to you, these are the questions that came out of last week. How can a grandparent positively advocate for social media / technology use changes, both to the teen grandchild and to their parents? And this question, what are some questions that one can use to prompt a teenager to engage in real conversation and maybe share their feelings? We talked a little bit about that in my hypothetical scenario here. What prompts for authentic conversation? This is a really good book to buy. This is part of what we're trying to do is depersonalize our engagement with the issue. You are mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or neighbor or friend to someone, and there's preconceived notions about what you are, who you are, and what you're thinking. Oh, that's just grandpa being overly concerned. Oh, that's grandma just not, she doesn't get it. Our young people could just throw that in our face, not really thinking anything more than that, because it's just a personal relationship. This becomes our kind of battering ram through the personal elements of it. A book like this or articles that stem from this subject matter, you might move towards your child or grandchild or your child that has children of a teenage age and say, well, these are the things that I'm reading. This is kind of the national conversation. It seems like there's a lot of communities, churches, schools that are moving towards a totally different approach to phones because the data is alarming. That's not you saying, I have opinions about your phone. It's saying, people have research about your phone, and if this can be the bridge, that's pretty helpful in depersonalizing the engagement. You get to retain your concern status. I'm someone who loves this child or loves these young people, but this is not just my opinion on the matter. This is cause for legitimate concern. So that's a good thing to do. I really enjoyed reading this. I didn't enjoy reading this book. This book was daunting. There was a lot of data that was coming towards me that I was like, oh, it's worse than I thought. But it's a really good resource for us to try to build a bridge to those families and youth. I mentioned this last week. I taught on these things to our high schoolers just 2 Wednesdays ago. We're on a series, and it's called, it was Your Phone and Your Brain. And I went through all this, and I explained to them, hey, I'm not your dad mad at you because your phone's out at the dinner table. I am a caring adult in your life, and this stuff sort of concerns me. Do you know how bad this is for your brain? That was my posture and my tone. And I've worked with these young people for a long time, and so I have a privileged place in a lot of their lives. And so I get to speak with maybe more authority, maybe even more condemnation than I would suggest for you to do, especially because it's outside of the family. That's just a privilege of being an adult outside of the family speaking into the lives of young people. But they were receptive to it. And I had multiple students say, I'm deleting Instagram for a week. And then I saw them the following week and they reported to me, yeah, I haven't been on Instagram. They said, oh, really? Do you feel any better? Yeah, I kind of do. I haven't been worried about things so much. That's great. Do it another week, see what happens. I didn't see you this past Wednesday, but I hope to see you this Wednesday, and we'll see if the road continues. But that's a great starting point, is to be able to connect with them authentically, and they care about it. They can handle the data. You can bring them towards them and say, this author is saying, this research says that there's a lot of, let's think about our boys for a second, there's a lot of young men who don't feel like they have much meaning right now. We're feeling driveless, a little purposeless. Is that true? Do you ever feel like that? Give them the space to do that. It's likely universal. We've all felt that at some season of life, but our young people might feel it to a greater degree, especially in this particular stage of life. Bring that to the forefront. Contend that with them. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry you're feeling that way. This is true of you? Oh yeah, sometimes. I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Well, what can we do to help kind of create a good trajectory for you? And then you just kind of work it out with those authentic relationships. So yeah, that started. The book is a really good idea. You can certainly find resources online. If you just searched the Anxious Generation resources, you'll go to there's a whole web page based off of what he's written, and there's a lot of different resources available on his site.
Who's the author?
Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. You mentioned that. Questions? Yeah, let me just emphasize this point. Your authenticity is king in this moment as it relates to the person that you're moving towards. You might have some deep, authentic concern. You might have to temper those down a little bit. But in your approaching a young person, especially with any sort of frequency, especially with directness, that's going to weigh on them in a good way. This person cares enough to keep coming to me on this subject. So don't get discouraged if you don't have really fruitful conversations the first couple times you move through this. But if you keep providing the opportunities for them to speak to some of the negative elements of their experience through social media, the times where they have felt left out or even bullied or feel like they weren't invited to the thing that they're now seeing. Anytime you give them that passage to speak about the negative sides of their experience of social media, you're just building trust into your relationship. And if you can sort of authentically carry that empathetically, I'm so sorry. Gosh, I remember when I was 13 and Susie Waters down the street had a neighborhood party, but I was invited. You have those stories. Engage with them. Let them know that you get it. You know what it's like to feel left out. I don't know a Susie Waters.
I'd really like to emphasize how important empathy is.
Mm-hmm.
When my son was about 13, we went through a really rough patch with him. And I got so frustrated, and I looked at my husband and I said, can't we just lock him in the closet till he's 18? And my husband, who was the most patient man I've ever met in my life, probably because he taught middle schoolers for 10 years,
Wow.
looked at me and said, just remember how hard it is to be 13. And that really hit me because you forget when you get older, you forget what it's like to go through those years, and it's not easy.
No. No one recalls the glory days as middle school. No one is thinking, man, I just want to get back to the 7th grade. No one wants that. No, we all aboard the 7th grade. 13 is a brutal year. You're becoming a person. Your worldview is being shaped. There's so much you're contending with. You're both trying to understand where you're coming from your family, but also you're rejecting your family. Physiological, we have this movement towards rebel and to say, no, I need distance. I need to create my own family and community around you. And so all that becomes chaotic. It's a whirlwind for our teenagers. It is a good thing to empathize with and to understand. Yeah, it's not fun.
Your body completely changes, your physical self.
It's not fun. It's not fun. It's not a fun thing. It is a good thing to keep in mind as we move towards empathy. I'm going to give us some time to raise some questions, I think. I'm liturgist downstairs at 11.
Oh, you need to go.
No, we need to go.
I got 5. You know how many times John has put me in a situation where I have to cover for him because he's late to the communion service. I want to finish this point. So the church's capacity to love its young people. Don't tell John I said that. How can the church better reach out to our young people, especially in these arenas of social media and technology? That was a question one of you all raised last week. In terms of our youth ministry, we are becoming much more sensitive to the creature of social media and how we actually go about teaching on it. We have to understand that it's likely to persist. We're likely to have social media. And that's why we have an Instagram, the PCPC Youth Instagram. It's a means of where we will actually engage with our students. If we somehow were able to make it so we didn't need social media, that would be ideal, but unlikely. But we will likely try to create stricter boundaries in how we utilize it. We're certainly not asking, hey, keep joining us on social media. It's a matter of that. It's just one means of communication that's really essential for our young people. But we're also teaching about it more often. It's coming up in our small groups. It's coming up, like I mentioned, I talked about this explicitly 2 weeks ago. We're trying to make it part of our curriculum for confirmation, for regular youth group outings, for Sunday morning faith formation, also Monday evening faith formation. But maybe our most significant contribution for how this church meets its youth in this way is our summer trips. Anytime we have a week kind of away from our phones, for the most part we allow them to bring our phones, but we're really good about curbing their use of phones on these trips. And so they have a week largely disconnected, detached, and that is hugely beneficial. It just allows a reset every time we do that. And so we're committed to kind of creating those reset moments. Lent, as we think about what we might give up, we're always kind of like, here's something you might give up. social media, your phone, or really limiting the amount of time. You can set time limits on your phone these days. There are features that are coming out even in the technological world that gives us better restriction tools for our youth. I can never blame a 12-year-old for doing something irresponsibly. They are innately irresponsible. A 12-year-old does just not have the brain power to be, that's enough for me today. I'm going to go read a book and go to bed early. No. And so we have to just accept the realities of the demographic we're reaching. And for our young people, that's us trying to coach them towards better guidelines. It's truly something that at some point I should preach about. It should be a proclamation, because I'm positive there's an intersection between even just a good stewardship of time that could touch upon this sort of thing. It should come from the pulpit, it should come in classes, and it should absolutely come from the conversations that church families are having with other church families. I think the thing that will be most successful, and I'm actually very encouraged about this, optimistic about this, I think when Bennett is 10, 11 years old, he will have an established group of friends. And I will move towards those parents and I'll say, hey, can we all, this close group of friends, can we all commit to not giving them smartphones until high school? Could we do this? And thankfully, because of the research, parents want to do what's best for their children. We have that innate draw. It's hardest if you're in it right now. It's hard to have established one way and then try to pull back. Can you imagine going towards a 16-year-old boy or girl and saying, okay, you've had your Instagram for 3 years, but now you're done with it? This would be. I don't know if it's even real. I don't know. It's a miracle. Jesus will have to come back for that. Like, that will just be something that I don't know if we can actually achieve. But in terms of what the church can do, we can engage with the topic. And we can certainly try to access our vulnerability, our empathy with your young people, and meet them in authentic relationship. That's always the most fertile ground for change. Encourage them with our love and our attention on these topics, and educate ourselves. That's a better book than this class is. The articulation, the ways that you'll actually grapple with some of the things that Jonathan hates writing about. I really encourage it to be a part of your reading in the next 6 months or so. But now I probably really need to run downstairs to get to this. Is someone willing to just, I know you might have your questions. I don't want to miss your questions. Could you, Scott, do you have a pen on you or a pencil? Are you trying to get down to 11 o'clock service? No. Okay. You're not going to church? He's getting on Instagram over there. If you have questions, have Scott write them down for me, and then if you have to run downstairs for the service, please go. Okay. Thanks, friends. Please do, Scott. Thank you all.
I can't read my writing.
How are you?
You got it going on.
Whoops, sorry.
I'm in the midst of all that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, the first one, I wrote this one at 17 though, and he's got really bad about it.
I know Peter told me.
Well, I've been following,
Anything else?